Hey everyone, welcome back to How to Write the Future podcast. I'm your host, Beth Barany, and I am an award-winning science fiction and fantasy writer. I'm also a creativity coach for writers, a developmental editor, a podcaster, and a filmmaker. So very excited today to have a special guest. I just want to let you know that this podcast, How to Write the Future podcast, is for people who want to, it's specifically for writers, science fiction and fantasy writers, who want to create positive, optimistic futures, because I believe that when we vision what is possible through our stories, we help make it so. So, introducing our guest today, Kristin Noland. Welcome, Kristin.
Hi, thank you very much.
Glad to have you here. So I'm going to share with everyone your wonderful bio. Kristin Noland is a developmental and line editor who works with women authors of speculative and crime fiction and guides them on how to structure and tighten their novels so they can give readers an entertaining and immersive experience. She's edited over 70 books, including 2 bestsellers, and with her caring and encouraging editing style, she helps authors create engaging and exciting novels. So stay tuned to the end where we'll let you know how you can stay in touch with Kristin. So today, Kristin and I are going to talk about speculative fiction, and we're going to dive a little deeper into that using, Kristin, your wonderful experience as an editor. Thank you again for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And I also want to let you know, and also let the listeners know, that I actually write sci-fi mysteries. So I've taken science fiction and mysteries and I've mushed them together, and I'm really writing police procedurals set in a near future. It's a little over 100 years from now.
Fascinating to me. I'm just this morning was working on my novel. It's a magical mystery / crime novel. So it's got the magic in it as well as just the regular mysteries. So
Love that. That's actually one of my favorite genres to read. So let's dive into it. For those who don't know, and maybe even for those who do know, can you define for us what is speculative fiction?
sure, it is quite a vast genre. And I think a lot of people don't know what all it entails, but science fiction is in there, of course, and fantasy. Also horror, the utopian, dystopian genres, alternate histories, time travel, superhero, those type of books. All of that is under the speculative fiction umbrella right now. So it's basically answering and asking, what if? So what if we could travel to a different galaxy? And then that's what the book is about. What if there were superheroes in the world? What if women ruled the world? Like those types of things. It's the what if question and the answers. And a lot of it tackles society's issues, either past issues or current issues, or the future issues if we have imagination of what a future issue would be. So it really encompasses all of that. I really enjoy the genre and other people's imagination on things. That's speculative fiction.
Love it. And I love your encapsulation of it's the what if, and then tied with an issue, past, present, or future. I love that so much because that's where I've always been living since I was little, as a reader and also as a writer, pretty much. So for you, why speculative fiction? What draws you to it, both as a writer and as an editor? And I imagine also as a reader.
Yeah. I think it is that different people's outlooks on what an issue is and how it can be changed and made better. Like I said, most of them are societal issues that are addressed in these books. And I think society does have many issues and we are trying to progress, but we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't made a utopian society yet. And I'm honestly shocked because what's one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. So I think it's the alternate world that a lot of them show us. And I think that's interesting to me. I can really get immersed in another world, and it could still be based on Earth. It doesn't have to be based anywhere else, but it's a whole different world that the author creates. And I really enjoy learning about what they think is a problem and how they see it as solutions can happen. It also sparks me to take a step further in my life to make that change. So I find that very appealing to read and edit and write. This is my first book, though. Let's not expect great things from this first one that I'm writing. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, though.
Exciting, yeah. And you said a little bit already in answer to this next question, which is what storytelling elements are highlighted in speculative fiction? I don't know if you were referring to the what if quality, but yeah, can you tell us more?
Definitely the what if quality, but also in speculative fiction is the fantastical or futuristic setting. So the setting is a large part as well, because in speculative fiction, the characters' world that they live in, whether it's a different government society or if it's out in space or if it's in a fantastical land with blue grass and a pink sky or whatever, the setting needs to impact the characters. And so that's important. So what surrounds them will impact them. Because it also encompasses environmental fiction. There, in those ones, the environment is really huge in impacting their lives. So that's also important.
Can you give me an example, either drawn from your own writing or from something that you've read, maybe a famous book even, where the setting impacts the characters? Because I think you're so right. And this is such a great point.
The setting impacts the characters?
Yeah. It makes me think about something like Lord of the Rings, where it's a big wandering story through all this different setting that impacts in terms of environmental challenges, or even like you were saying, in environmental fiction or eco-fiction, the characters are dealing with real ecological issues and problems. Or like in my stories, most of the stories are set on space stations, or at least these 4 books here in the first 4 books of the J.D. McAllister series, it's all on a space station. So it has constraints. It has space constraints. I'm really leaning into the locked room mystery because that's essentially is.
Yeah, it is.
A huge environment. I deal with a spacewalk. I deal with depressurization. The way the space station was actually built provides a setting and part of the mystery for one of the books. So the way the station environment is organized is the world in which my characters play in, and it defines who comes and how they come there. It impacts all the story in a lot of different ways. So is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Setting can impact in basically any genre, but to use some of my favorite examples, 1984, that's my absolute favorite. It was a warning, not a way to go, people. But the setting there very much impacts because Big Brother is always watching. And so that's something that back then it didn't actually happen that way. There was influence and such, but nothing was in people's homes like it is now. So I think somebody watching everything you do and the people looking out for the things that you say and everything like that was hugely impactful on that story. So imagine a story that there wouldn't have been people to tell about the thought crimes and that kind of thing. So if they didn't have those people informing, then part of the story wouldn't have been as impactful. And that was part of that setting, the fake wars that were going on. I'm giving away a bunch of stuff for the books. The fake wars that were having also, that impacted their lives because they thought it was real. And he even had the military trucks with the soldiers coming back in them. And although there was no war actually happening, so that setting, and he pulled that in from military experiences that were going on at the time as well. So I think things like that. The Hunger Games, that was huge with all different types of settings. And it really showed how a jungle setting would be different than maybe a desert setting would impact how they survived. And so that was huge part of that story. So it definitely makes a difference in your writing. Another one would be The Handmaid's Tale. It was still the United States, but it was much different. And in Canada, everything seemed to be going as we knew it originally, but in the United States, things had flipped. So that setting of that really impacted. Even though they were normal houses and everything, they were set up in old buildings and repurposed. And that kind of setting pulled that in too.
That's so great. Yeah. I really love this whole conversation around how the setting impacts the story so intently. It's something that I see in beginning writers, encouraging them to get really specific and also understand how did it become that way. Yeah. Is there any other storytelling elements that are highlighted in speculative fiction?
The characters, of course, are going to be big as in everything else. Yeah, so the world building, the characters, and the plot. Yeah, everything goes together, as you well know, and as every author knows, everything is all together in that. In most genres, subgenres, it needs to take a step back, the world building, for the characters to evolve and into the plot. That said, there's fantasy and sci-fi where it's a huge part. High fantasy is setting is probably a quarter of the book because you're describing these huge fantastical things that need a lot of description, and readers love that. So those three things I think in speculative fiction, the world, the characters, and the plot. Characters dealing with the world the way it is in these books, that's what drives the plot. It's the characters and their surroundings. And when I say setting, I don't just mean a description of a mountain. I mean the world that they live in with the rulers and their neighbors and those kind of things.
Yeah. And when you said the rulers, it made me think of one of the questions that I have in a resource for all our listeners, which is the world building workbook for fiction writers, and which is the power structure. What is the power structure? How did it come to be? What maintains it? Who wins? Who loses? And something that I'm thinking a lot about is who or what had to lose for this power structure to come into place. So I'm world building my story world, trying to come up with a backstory that takes place in 2060 for a story that takes place in, I think it's 2133 is the current book I'm working on. And it's our future. So I'm also working on what if in our future, in our near future, in 30 plus years from now, but it's my character's backstory when this big thing happened. And I'm thinking all about power structures and environmental issues, space junk, then what if this and what if that, and doing lots of research because that is our setting. That's a big pivotal thing that's going to happen in my story that shapes the events of the character.
That's very important. I worked on a novel where people with disabilities, they were the ones who were ruling society, and the people who didn't have a disability were considered less than. And so that was interesting. And for me, it took place a little too fast because it was only like 20 years in the future or so. And I asked them how the change happened, how we went from one thing to the complete opposite. And the author didn't have an answer to that. And I was like, it's a great story, it's a great premise, but you're going to have some supporting facts, your made up facts, but it has to be plausible. And so that was something that she needed to work on with that plausibility of how it became to be, because as we know, that's a struggle to get a power change.
How do authors research or for speculative fiction? What do you recommend?
I recommend looking at past societal issues and past problems with things. Let's say we're having, right now, there's the gender issue, and it's been coming to light for a little bit now. Again, this all happened before, and we made slight advancement, but we're not making the big advancement that we need. So researching how that came about before, what people tried and how they succeeded in some areas and failed in others can help you get an idea for how to structure your story and how we can make it go even further and how much advancement we're actually going to get in the next 20, 30, 50 years, whatever the storyline is. But it's the research into what people did before with, let's say, even like a battle scene or something like a war. You would want to see what wars were similar to that. And so you can pick up on the structure, the plans that they had, what worked, what didn't, in order to make your story different with how it turns out. Or maybe the same. Maybe people want to say, here, history's repeating itself and it's going to be exactly the same outcome as we had before, is also an idea. But researching those things, it's very important to the story. Even if you have something like a massive tsunami that happens, you need to look at the devastation that causes in multiple things. Because granted, you've got a lot of water, but that water also sparks fires. So now you have a fires and you have that, and people need to deal with both of them, or maybe somebody just has to deal with one in a different place and the water is less important to them. They're dealing with the fire, or maybe it's the aftermath where things are just covered in salt water and now you have a problem with your water being fresh water or in being contaminated with salt water, and you have to figure out how to get all those things out, those impurities out of it so you have drinking water. All of those kind of things you need to research so that your story's plausible. It's all about plausibility with those things. So you want to make sure that you have the factual evidence to back up your story that's taking it a step further or two steps further, but you want to have that basis still there in the factual research.
That's great. I think that's really helpful.
I've been researching a lot for crime fiction. I have books here for crime scenes, forensics, and police procedurals so that I have that basis of knowledge for my story. So, yeah, I'm doing that research, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
The police procedurals, not so much, but the forensics is extremely fascinating, and how they work the crime scene is really cool too. Just because you're writing speculative fiction doesn't mean you can't have this crime thing in it.
Is there anything else about world building or creating a society that is around our characters in speculative fiction that you want to address?
I would say that most readers of the speculative fiction genre like fast-paced novels, so pacing is huge in it. Now, high fantasies people probably want a little bit less in high fantasy, less fast-paced or slower paced, because you need all of those descriptions in high fantasy. Pacing involves action scenes as well as the follow-up scenes, so the fast and slow. But in speculative fiction, there's going to be a faster pace overall. Not quite as fast as thrillers, pretty fast, or horror, but it's going to be, and horror is in this, but horror is, like I said, like high fantasy needs a little slower. Horror is going to need a little faster pacing. So pacing is also something that you want to take into account when you're putting all your plot and all that into, yeah, so it's all meshed together with one thing leads to another. And when editing, I pick up on so much stuff that deals with character. And I may even put into a character subheading some world building because of the effects that it has on the characters, that it should be affecting them more. So characterization encompasses a lot. It pulls in point of view and tone and all that into the character subheading in some of my editorial letters and such. Yeah, it all comes together, but pacing is another one that I would say that people need to think about when they're writing speculative fiction.
That sounds great. And I should let our listeners know that you've written a post for my blog, Writer's Fun Zone, on, here it is, what to expect from professional editing. And so we'll reference that in the notes for the show. Listeners, Kristin is an editor and you're a specialist, which I love that you're a specialist. It helps to refer people to you. I would imagine the writers feel really safe because you're speculative fiction, crime fiction, and those are your two specialties, which is so awesome and something I've been writing for the last, gosh, how long has it been now? Since 2016, 8 years? Yeah. So I've been deep in this space and so happy that you're here. Really, the big question is, when are they ready for you?
As a developmental editor, that's the big picture editing. So things for plot, characterization, character arcs, and world building, those kinds of things. That's the developmental editing. To be ready for that, you should have a finished book. I prefer to have one that's probably in its second to third draft, but there are times where I have clients who've finished the book or they're so close to finishing, they're just not sure how to wrap it up and they need some help with that. So I can also help with brainstorming ideas on how to finish the novel. But what I really like is to have them have not just written the full story, but gone back through and tried to catch any plot holes that might be there or add some conflict that wasn't strong enough, or make sure that their characters have goals and motivations for what they do and something that they want versus what they need. I come across a lot of wants and needs that are the same or very similar, and that doesn't quite work. So I would prefer them to have most of those things worked out to the best, and it's only to the best of their ability. So if they have done the best that they can, that's when you seek an editor in general. Once you've done everything that you can, then you go and find an editor for you. Now, line editing comes after the developmental. So all of the plot issues are figured out, the characters are deep and well-rounded, and all of that stuff is good. And then line editing is where I look at each paragraph, each line of the paragraph, and make sure that it flows from one to the other, make sure the chapters flow well together. and then sentence variation as well. So a lot of subject verb sentence structures, great, but we do need to have some other things mixed in there so that it doesn't become repetitive reading. And so that's what I do. I help mold the language a little differently so it's a better read.
Yeah.
I do not change the author's tone or their voice or their style, but I just tweak it and adjust it to be able to have an easier read and make sure things are clear for the reader so that they can enjoy the book.
That's great. That's really great. So if people want to find you and reach out and get support, where can they go?
nolandediting.com is my website. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, I do have an about page, and I also have portfolios. You can look and see what I've worked on so far. Those are just the published books, though. That's hard for an editor when you see their portfolio and maybe there's only 10 things on their portfolio. That doesn't mean they've only edited 10 books. They may have edited 50 books, but 10 of them are published. So we can't advertise the names of books that aren't published yet or pictures of books that haven't been published yet. I say that I've edited over 70 books because I have, but there's only like 25 or something published so far. I have a YouTube channel also, and I'm on Threads and LinkedIn. Those are the ones where I'm active on.
That's great. That's so wonderful. And so I encourage listeners, if you want support and you're ready for editing, to reach out to Kristin. So for our audience, is there any last tips that you would like to give them about how they can orient themselves as a writer and just keep going? Any words of advice for our writers out there?
You hear the advice a lot that says, write what you know. And that doesn't mean write your life story. It means write things that you're familiar with. One of my characters loves antique furniture, and I love antique furniture. So I've built that in so I can write a little bit about what I enjoy about it. So I can describe those things in the way I see them. So when I say write what you know, do your research, make sure you have your facts straight so that you can adjust and tweak those into your story and it makes it plausible.
Wonderful. I love that as a theme for today's episode, the amount of research that actually goes into writing these stories. I love it. I just want to thank you so much, Kristin, for being with us today. And I just want to invite everybody who's listening to check out the World Building Workbook for Fiction Writers. And that's a free workbook downloadable for you. Great, everyone. So signing off, write long and prosper.